Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today on this LinkedIn Live on Catherine and my favorite topic, apparently, to talk about together, which is budget consultations and why they are such a great tool for nonprofit policy engagement, advocacy, etc. So before we get started, I just wanted to give Catherine a chance to introduce herself and talk a bit about what she's doing and her expertise in this area. So Catherine, over to you.
Thanks for the welcome, Jesse. So hello, everyone. My name is Catherine LeBlanc, and I'm a social impact communications consultant. I run my own small consulting firm called LeBlanc & Co. Communications, focused on the social impact side of things, mostly nonprofits, but other types of change makers. And my method is using strategic communications as a tool to accelerate social impact. And before I stepped into the consulting space, I had helped different nonprofits with budget engagement pieces and advocacy campaigns around budgets in different levels of government, but primarily federal. So over to you, Jesse, for an intro.
Thanks so much, Catherine. And thanks everyone again for either joining or watching a recorded version of this as well. So my main focus is on government relations for nonprofits. I focus on empowering nonprofits to influence policy, raise funds, and make change with government stakeholders. I think nonprofits have an important voice that needs to be heard at the government tables. And I think there's a lot of ways that we can make it easier for nonprofits to engage and be successful in those conversations. I've worked in the sector for the last 10 years, and prior to that, actually worked in the federal government for 10 years as well. And I founded my firm back in February 2021, so almost 2 years ago now. And my goal is to build one of Canada's leading progressive feminist GR firms. So really excited to be here today to talk about budget consultations and to get more organizations participating in them.
Thank you very much, Jesse. Jesse and I are frequent collaborators, and we did a webinar on this topic back before the holidays. So this is a recap, and we're going to be also talking about the context of where we are right now, stepping into budget season. So to kick things off, I'm going to ask Jesse a couple questions. So Jesse, we hear about nonprofits and charities and whether they can do advocacy. How does this relate to the type of advice you'd give your clients that are nonprofits and charities and the whole budget consultation process?
Yeah, thanks for that, Catherine. I mean, I find it really fascinating that here we are in 2023, and this question still comes up all the time when you talk to nonprofits and charities in Canada. They're quite afraid of that advocacy word. I think a legacy, as we know from certainly, perception that, and in some cases, certainly reality as well, that there was a crackdown, maybe now more than 10 years ago, early 2010s, I would say, went on, and maybe even late 2000s, mm-hmm. on some organizations that were perceived to be using too much of their resources on advocacy. And the CRA in very, very small number of cases, but it created a lot of attention, went after a couple of organizations working in specific areas. Unfortunately, the impact of that has been this huge advocacy chill among the nonprofit and charitable sector in Canada, which is really unfortunate. First of all, those rules, they don't. There hasn't been any instances of organizations being targeted on that basis for several years. Of course, it's important, as everyone knows who is a charity, to make sure you're following CRA guidelines. Those guidelines don't actually apply to nonprofits, first of all. So if you're not actually a registered charity, you have more flexibility in that area, first of all. Second of all, if you are a registered charity, there's still quite a bit of scope for you to do a lot of what people would consider to be advocacy, policy engagement, and involving yourself in processes like these. So specifically, if you are doing something that is closely related to your organizational mandate, your charitable mandate, that is welcomed, in fact, encouraged and permitted. You're also able to spend, well, actually, a few years ago, it was up to 10%. It's now higher than that. And I will get the numbers and post them on this a bit later on specifically advocacy related activities. Really, the key test always is that your activities need to be related to your charitable mandate as an organization and also nonpartisan. So if you're having, for example, an all candidates debate, make sure that you're inviting all candidates to participate. Make sure that you're not publicly endorsing one party or another on behalf of your organization. Those are really the key pitfalls that people can fall into. But within those parameters, there's a huge amount of scope to engage. And I really think that we should be engaging a lot more as a sector, especially because it gives us an opportunity to advocate on behalf of people that we're working with. So I would say that this is, we're going to talk a bit more today about this, but budget consultations are certainly one way of easily engaging in what's very, very not just permitted, but welcomed and encouraged advocacy.
Thanks for such a thorough answer, Jessie. I hear that question quite a lot, so it was a great way to open up today's conversation. And now to move on to the more budget-related side of things, I just like to ask you, why this chat now? We say that we're entering into budget season. What budgets are we talking about? Want to give me some context, Jessie, for our listeners?
Yeah, absolutely. So I did call this this LinkedIn Live just the season, and no, not the holiday season, but another exciting season for GR and policy types like us. And so there are actually a few areas where there are very specific opportunities to offer input around the budget, and at the federal level, at the provincial level in Ontario and in Quebec. Budget consultations are currently open. Each province has, and the federal government have a website. For the federal government, it's actually Let's Talk Budget 2023.ca, which is a nice accessible URL to find. On there's instructions on how to complete a submission. There's a number of different ways of engaging. There's some specific ones that are open right now. I think for both also the provinces that are currently open, there are some both the option of doing surveys or actually writing submissions. And I would certainly encourage organizations to make the extra effort to go just beyond the survey and write a submission whenever possible. So when governments issue these public budgets every year, they're all required to do so. They all follow a slightly different timeline. And you can look at any province and look for information. It's available. They just aren't open right now necessarily, but they have a lot of great information on their provincial budgets available. So these are a key communications and transparency exercise for governments. It's an opportunity for them to lay out in detail their plans and package key messages the way they want the public to receive them. They're very high profile events. Often if people don't pay a lot of attention to politics, they still know, they might still hear about the budget, especially because it's, there's a perception around it being kind of pocketbook issues and, hitting people's direct economic interests, which is true in many ways, but maybe not in the ways that we always think about. So they're really a great opportunity to kind of jump onto this bandwagon where there's a lot of attention being paid, a lot of discussion about government policy, government funding, where's it going, and to take part in that important conversation. And we can put some links into the chat of this later on, or I'll also maybe just repost this with links later on that can direct you to some of the specific information about where you can participate in the budgets. But yeah, I mean, obviously as well, please feel free to DM either of us if you want more information. We can point you towards some examples as well. Yeah, I think in terms of sort of covering why it's important. Yeah. Go ahead. Sorry. Yeah.
Oh, thanks for that recap. I was just going to say what a thorough recap of entering into budget season, Jessie. And I just wanted to say what you were surely about to launch into. Why does this matter? Why is this a good opportunity? Why would you say that it's worthwhile?
Yeah, no, exactly. And I think now that we've kind of talked about, first of all, that it is allowed. And not only is allowed, but there's a great amount of public information available on how to participate. So then let's talk about, as you say, so there's a lot of great reasons why this is a really good tool. A strong budget submission can become a public document. You can put it on your website. You can share it on social media. It can help build your own organizational reputation and credibility. It helps the government see that you're taking their work and business seriously enough to understand their policy priorities and comment on them. So it's really a great reputation and credibility builder. It's also, as I mentioned previously, it's really an opportunity to advocate on behalf of your community in a very public way. So if there's interests that you think are not being tabled or brought to the government's attention, people's priorities that are not being reflected, this is your chance to really, speak out in a very structured and public way. It also opens your organization up to new opportunities and gives you more potential to collaborate. You may learn that other organizations are working on similar issues or prioritizing similar issues to you through the budget consultation process. And certainly you can sometimes coordinate with them prior to submissions, but also you can take a look at previous year's submissions and see, oh, this is what they've been talking about for a few years. This is also of interest to us. Maybe we should reach out. And also it can attract positive attention. People will say, oh, look, this is an organization that's active on this file. We should involve them in our next, committee meeting. It's also, relatively speaking, quite a low cost and easy way to get involved. Typically, the submissions are maybe between 500 to 1,000 words, maybe 1,500 at most. Not a lengthy document, and really should be very much grounded in what you're already working on. So it really shouldn't be something that you have to create, completely from scratch or put a lot of work into. It's also can be a great way to attract media attention, because the media does pay attention to the budget and to responses to the budget and input on the budget a lot more than they pay attention to many other of the minutiae of policy making that take place in government each year. It can also be a great way to engage your supporters as well. You can share this with them and say, look, these are the issues that we're speaking to government about. If you want to see us do more of this, please continue to support our work. And it can be a great tangible way to show what some of your impact has been. So that's a lot about why. We talked about kind of the context, why it's important, when you can participate, and we'll share some more details on that as well. But actually now I kind of want to turn over to you, Catherine, to talk a bit more about some of the details. And basically, with your own background in terms of communications, writing, journalism, can you talk a bit about how you write a budget submission?
Thanks for that important question, Jesse, and thanks for having set up the context. When you're writing a budget submission, you want to really start by determining your goals, in terms of what your organization is trying to get out of the process, both in terms of the ask that you're substantially putting on the table and other goals, thinking of if you're going after media attention, coalition building, et cetera. We're going to go on into that in a little bit more details. When you're defining your asks, you're going to be looking at what your organizational advocacy priorities are, particularly as they relate to the budget, and also the government's goals. This is when it's good to crack into a ministerial mandate letter or refer to the conversations that your organization has been having with government. I'm thinking different strategies, different provincial, national action plans, documents like that set the government's agenda. And ideally, you're going to be looking for asks that really make sense with your organization's brand. You don't want to be here and then your ask is like way over here and not connected. So you're going to want it to be really related to your mandate, something exciting and important and worthwhile to ask for, but still linked to your core purpose and at the intersection of giving you enough leeway to parlay how it is related to the government's interest as well. That's where those different types of agendas come to mind. Now, I would typically say an organization may be asking for like roughly 3 different asks in a budget submission. If you have 2 and they're incredible, go with 2, right? If there's 4 and it makes sense, you could see 5. I'm just giving around 3 as a bit of a parameter to give you context that you don't have to only ask for one thing in a budget submission. but you're not going to want to do 14 asks, 16 asks. You know what I'm saying? It should be pretty tailored down to the best and most strategic ideas that your organization has. Jesse's referenced a little bit about format and length. There's often online web form surveys for budget submissions and also processes for you to submit a PDF, typically to say upload it. Now, if you can, you're going to want to go with the more thorough option, which is writing your own brief. And any type of things you put in a survey, you don't want to be writing it into a survey. This is the level of formal process requiring polish where you're starting everything in a Word doc or Google Doc as far in advance as you can, regardless of if it's survey questions or a PDF, and really polishing them, making them concise, making them clear. You're going to want to get people to review your survey, your consultation submission, make it as clear as possible. And you really want everything that you do in the budget consultation process to echo the same asks and messaging. So say your executive director gets an audience with either a minister, ministerial staff, or say civil service, they're going to be echoing the same points, right? So when you're opening with defining your strategy and asks, that's for every part of the budget process. And when you're writing this document, Jesse gave some parameters of, say, 500 words, 1,000 words, something in that ball game. We're going for short and concise. And I'll just say this quickly. It, of course, has to be within the jurisdiction of the government that you are writing to. And if there is any cross-jurisdictional issues at play, make sure that you're articulating that and really explaining how it is within the purview of that level of government. And I would also say to tie it in with your overall organizational advocacy goals as well. It should really be integrated into the types of things that you were saying before the budget and after. Now I'm going to move into a few other things I'm going to talk about today. I'm going to say where you can find ideas and examples. You can actually just search on Google and say previous budget submission from such and such large organization. You may be able to see what they've done before. There are also quite a few nonprofit sector organizations. I'm talking about the Ontario Nonprofit Network. I'm talking about Imagine Canada, and they typically put together helpful toolkits. So it may be something for the particular year, particular level of government, or it may just be a reference point on a format or a sample for a consultation document. We're going to be sharing, again, some resources, as Jesse said. And if you are lucky enough to belong to a say industry group, a nonprofit network specific to, you're part of the nonprofit sector, say, for example, a network of women's organizations. You're going to be looking to those bodies and seeing if they are providing resources, templates, that sort of thing on what the budget briefs typically look for their sector. Jesse, do you have anything else to add on where you would seek inspiration if you were a nonprofit looking to get involved in the process?
I mean, I think you've covered, very comprehensively, Catherine. So thank you in terms of where to look. I think definitely, I just wanted to pick up on what you were saying about, there being umbrella organizations and industry associations that have great information on this available. And I would also add that, something I always say to clients and to people that I'm working with around policy advocacy issues, is that good company can be so valuable. So just to talk about how, if you are aware of others who are doing submissions, if you can coordinate messaging and asks, that can make your submission that much more effective. And I think that's a whole area also of conversation, which is around, you've worked hard on the submission, got it in on time in the right format, et cetera. But then what happens? What's next? How do you amplify, what you've done and make sure that it really reaches the people who you want to hear the message? So maybe Catherine, you can talk a bit about that as well.
Absolutely, Jesse. Working in coalition is so helpful. Building those relationships year round, not just for the budget. And you'll also often see joint campaigns around budget season, organizations coming together and publicly making asks. We've seen those, particularly during COVID, in a broader context, say like a very broad network of social service organizations from different sectors, be it in, for example, frontline shelters, be it in food security, YMCAs, working together to advocate broadly for social service fundings. But it can also be a network of local nonprofits in Halifax. It can be a formal coalition that exists with the title, and it can also be you working with your peers and bringing organizations together. You can do that to write joint submissions, or you also can write your own submission and each share one common point within it, or even write a submission and have other organizations sign on. So that's a little bit of nitty gritty on amplification on the coalition side. This is such great advice from Jesse. Now I want to move on to some other pieces on amplification. When you write a budget submission and you're back at the very beginning planning out your objectives, I would ask yourself how much resources, how much time, and what type of channels do you have to engage in campaigning around the budget? So what could that look like? When you are identifying your messaging and your asks, keep in mind how you could create a multi-channel communications campaign. So I'm talking social media for your supporters, engaging supporters on your email list, and when appropriate, doing media relations. So that's what I mean by multi-channel, pulling in the different tools at your disposal. Different organizations are going to do this differently, right? Like if you're a one-person nonprofit and you're really busy, we're proud of you for getting a budget submission. Okay. So it's going to be tailored to your capacity. Alternatively, some organizations are very hyper focused on budget and advocacy, and it's just a very core piece of their work. They're thinking about it all year long. They may have a little bit of a bigger budget. Of course, those organizations are going to be planning out budget campaigns months in advance. So just like how you would build a comms plan for any type of campaign, budget is no different. It's just that there's this focal point bringing everyone together. There's the formal brief and different engagements and a more set timeline. So think about a communications plan for a campaign, but with some additional pieces. You're going to want to make your actual brief public. Your budget brief, I would want to make it available in some more digestible ways, like social media posts, instead of just the dry text of a PDF, but also like make the actual brief public itself. I think that is really strong for transparency. It helps your stakeholders learn more about what you're up to. It's just a really great idea to make the actual budget submission public. And then when you make it public, send it around. If you're in Dartmouth, Nova Scotia, and you're writing about something for the whole federal government, send it to your MP. Send it to the parliamentary secretary relevant on the file. Send it to the minister. Send it to friendly MPs in your area. This applies for all levels of government. You want to chat with friendly city councillors, friendly politicians of all sorts. When you have your brief public, it really brings a lot of opportunities to be like, hello, we are the such and such organization. Please see our budget brief. Here's what we're working on. We'd love to chat. When you're sending it, a step even further is meeting with these members of parliament, meeting with these politicians and asking for a meeting and being able to do a more formal conversation. Those are very important in relationship building. A lot of people are emailing people on the Hill. And the last piece I want to say, although I've alluded to this before, when we talk about a campaign for the budget, also think about, we don't always get what we're asking for. How do you integrate this into your advocacy materials going forward? It may start with a brief, but then how does it turn into a more permanent part of your organization? How does it turn into, for example, maybe then 6 months later, you bump your campaign with a day of action. Maybe you bump your campaign with a toolkit, or when a certain topic is back at a committee. You want to look at the longer term landscape and identify other opportunities outside of the budget. Now, Jesse, I'm sure, knows a lot about that. So you're with your area of expertise being government relations. So, when the budget season is over, would like you to chat about any more thoughts in that arena.
Yeah, thanks. No, thanks, Catherine. And again, all the points you're making around amplification are so valuable, because I think, again, as you say, we know some organizations have limited resources, but it's still important as much as possible if you can do more than just submit that statement, right? You want to do a bit more than that, even if it's, emailing it to other MPs would be great. Emailing it, sharing it around. So yeah, anyway, all of that is, I think, very worthwhile. I think that in terms of, if you get, you put in a submission for the budget comes out, then you'll have a chance to see, well, how were my issues addressed? Were they talked about? Were they addressed? Do I need to start formulating a response? And that, I think, is also an important area to consider for budget engagement, how to respond to budget announcements. So I don't know, Catherine, do you want to talk about that a little bit as well?
Yeah, that's a really great question, Jesse. And the key to a good budget reaction is preparation, right? When you're planning what your asks are, it's not like, oh, I want more money for something to do with like a broad sector, right? You want to make really targeted goals, because then when you're analyzing the budget, you're measuring it up against something specific. And if you've been public in what you're asking for, then it really gives you the parameters to say, oh, we've asked for this, and here's how it fell short. Or we've asked for this, here's how we got half of the way there. You're going to want to have those specific asks. And then before the budget, block off budget day on your calendar. Read the news stories coming out early that week. Sometimes the media will get a story given early. When you wake up at the day of a budget and there's a CBC 5 a.m. story of budget to include, and then it's normally one like very large, very interesting piece to drive the news. So that's what I mean by it's not really just a 1 hour long activity when the budget comes out. Federally, we're talking later in the afternoon. It's going to depend on different jurisdictions, but really going to be looking at that whole week's going to be a little bit busy. That whole day is going to be a little bit busy. You're going to want to block it off. And in the weeks heading into a budget day, you're going to want to think about the tone, think about the parameters of what your reaction is going to be. You may be able to, through talking to key contacts, get a little bit of a temperature read on, okay, is this a budget where we're going to like what we're seeing? Is this going to be an issue? You may, of course, have absolutely no context and no kind of lead, but you may be able to fish around for a little bit of context. But regardless, prepare for all scenarios. Think about the messaging. How harsh or how joyful are you going to be in your tone? What is the range? What does your organization typically do in reactions is something to look at before, either for budget, for legislation, et cetera. Look at prior responses, look at comparable organizations' responses, think about sort of that spectrum of tone and how you could react to different things. And then you're just going to want to be available. And timeliness is important, but
Yes.
timeless is extremely, extremely important, but you can't make mistakes as well. So in terms of, is there someone from your team with a research background you can pull in, or perhaps can several organizations pool together and do a debrief call when the budget comes out? Because say we're talking small nonprofits, one may have a really strong communications lead, really savvy on media relations and how to put out a press release reaction if needed, and may know media contacts. But then another organization may have someone with a really strong policy, research, legislation background, because We've all gotten a budget, gone control F, looked for our specific things, scrolled through, read it, gone back to the beginning, gone back to the table of contents, read the whole thing, and still had a question or two. So that's when teamwork and preparing in advance and talking with your colleagues is going to put the most of it together. Like a budget reaction, it cannot come out a week later. Like it's not even really worth. It's not even really worth doing. It's not a budget reaction at that point. You'd want to have a completely different name for what you're doing.
A budget I would say the next day at the very latest, would be the very latest.
A budget reaction, day after is still totally respectable, but to get the media cycle, it is as soon as possible. So that's why I said, you try to get a little bit of a barometer on what you may expect. You prep for different scenarios. And, if what you were advocating for got money, particularly new money in the budget, you can call media right away. Or if you have a compelling and I would say egregious oversight that you can point to something that wasn't included, then that also can be a media hook. But I would encourage you to be honest to yourself. Everyone always wants to be in the media, but if the thing that you were asking for, maybe it wasn't included, but maybe there wasn't a groundswell of public support for a certain issue. It's hard to put out I am outraged, I deserve to be in the Globe and Mail commentary. However, if there was a groundswell of public opinion, you laid the groundwork, there was campaigns, there was research and data showing, for example, how a certain community is underfunded, then that's where you may be able to hook something in a we didn't get funding story.
Yeah,
anything to add on that point? A budget
reaction. No, I completely agree, and that's kind of the art and science of government relations and advocacy. Is that, you don't want to be afraid to speak out, of course, right? We're civil society; that's our role. But thinking about how you speak out and regarding what is important. It's just important to be thoughtful. You want it to be strategic. You want it to lay the foundation for future conversations they're going to continue to have. And you want to make sure it's fact-based. I think that's also really important. There's nothing worse than going out and criticizing something that actually was in there, or, for which there's actually a reason why it couldn't be in there, because, for example, it's the wrong jurisdiction for that particular government. So just make sure that you've done your homework, as Catherine says, be thoughtful, but don't be afraid to speak out if there's something that you really thought, was going to be in there and it's not. That's also a really important opportunity and important role for nonprofits and charities. Yeah, I think this is something that you and I, Catherine, could talk about all day.
Yeah,
I feel like. But in terms of kind of time and where we're at with the LinkedIn Live, I think we'll wrap it up for now. I think if people are interested in learning more, please follow both of us here on LinkedIn, on other social media as well. And we'll continue to be talking about these topics and sharing information about them. Feel free to reach out to us and DM us as well if you are wanting to have a conversation about this topic. You want to just pick our brain, or learn more about what we do and what kind of support we can offer your organization on this specific area, or just more generally around your government relations strategy, in my case, your comms and public relations in Catherine's case as well. We're always there. And just as we wrap up, I want to give a quick pitch as well for a workshop that I have coming up next week on Tuesday. There's still time to register up until basically end of day Sunday. And what I'm going to be doing is helping organizations plan their whole year of government engagement. That including many opportunities like budget submissions, and how you can shape those in the direction that you want in order to achieve your government funding goals and your advocacy goals for 2023. So I'll share more information on that, or feel free to DM me if you're interested in that as well. And Catherine, just over to you for some final reflections and words.
Well, Jesse, this has been a great conversation. I do feel like we talk a lot about budgets. We can always continue to do so. So Jesse and I are only just, if you're watching this on LinkedIn, a DM away to continue this conversation and also just to follow us. And we're putting out resources, reflections, reactions pretty pretty often. So thank you so much, Jesse, and this was a pleasure.
Thanks again, and have a great afternoon, everyone. Bye.
Bye.